Welcome to another edition of IndieSponge. This week has been a very fun week. We've been sitting at home and seeing all the action that's happening at the Venice Film Festival, and it's also the beginning of the Toronto Film Festival. So we're quite excited about all the fallout. So we're recording right after the Venice Film Festival bestowed all their prizes. Kevin Jagernauth, what are some major takeaways for you?
Oh, that's a big question. I think the big takeaway we can agree on from Venice to start off is that Nomadland is going to be huge at the awards season. It's a big film for this year. It looks like the breakout film we expected from Chloe Zhao after The Rider.
Yeah, no, Nomadland was, again, I think there was a lot of prestige or clout, the fact that it was premiering at 4 major film festivals. Um, the Venice programmers, Alberto, it's not an accident that this was positioned towards I think it was the day before the festival ended. They certainly knew that they had lightning in the bottle. It's a rare, I can't think of another time, perhaps with the exception of Roma, where we kind of had a feeling that we were going to see a special movie, and that it was going to place itself within the top list of winners. And it certainly says it's certainly going to be interesting for not only Oscar season but also for the Indie Spirit Awards, where we have Kelly Reichardt, we have Eliza Hittman, and now we have Chloe, where it's like this 3 film grudge match of like truly independent visions and microscopic budgets. Perhaps Reichardt, her film is just a nudge or a little bit lower in terms of the production costs of Nomadland, but yeah, it's gonna be a fun conversation starter, and yeah, for me, it's ahead of the pack, and I think the critical reaction says a lot, but also the fact that McDormand is just like, she's a shoo-in for other Oscar talk.
Oh, absolutely. You hit on a good point. I mean, with those filmmakers you mentioned, we're talking about, 3 women who each have a really unique style and voice, and it's just really cool that we're now going to spend the next, however months long until the Oscars delving into their work. I think that's really cool. It's really exciting. And you're right, Frances McDormand could be up for her. I believe it would be her 3rd Oscar if she wins,
Mhm.
which is pretty historic and great. So yeah, so that's one takeaway from Venice. Nomadland becoming the talk of the town, both in Venice and in Toronto. I think next we should probably acknowledge that Michael Franco kind of came out of nowhere with his film New Order. He's been a presence at Cannes and some other fests, but he's really like, this film seems to be poised to make him. This is his breakout. I think he's always been an art house favorite, but I think this film is going to be one that gets people really talking about him as a filmmaker. And it's been a while. It's been a while for him.
Yeah, he goes against the grain. He makes very difficult cinema, as you stated. He's a favorite at Cannes. He won a Certain Regard a couple of times out. He actually, one of the jurors, and now I'm drawing a blank. The guy from Reservoir Dogs that was in
Tim Roth.
Tim Roth. Yeah, like he actually offered him a part on stage. And what's funny is during the awards gala for this, he actually told Kate Blanchett that he'd love to work with her after having won the prize. But all that to say, there's 2 things I want to say about it's interesting how a lot of the top awards were given to films that really were at the tail end of the Venice Film Festival. And again, with Nomadland and this film, these are 2 films that have actually, we believed, or it was projected that they would be at the Cannes Film Festival this year, and they've been in the can for a long time. So I think there's something encouraging about spending time in post-production and having or giving yourself that time to not necessarily find the film, but hone into that film and harness that film. And um, what a lot of people see is that he does take chances, not only in terms of narrative. There's a lot of surprise elements to this film, but just from the get-go, he also does things that we haven't seen him do in the past. And I'm quite ecstatic or happy that the jury were able to look over, or not look past, but to say, hey, this is a film that takes on a big subject matter and does it in an unflinching way and a pretty horrific way, and that they were able to assess or give a certain value to the film as a whole. And by just comparing it to like something like Roma, this one, it ups the ante and it's not afraid of going into a very violent world. And we've seen this with a lot of previous um, Mexican filmmakers who go there. Amat Escalante is one of them. Carlos Regatas, to a certain level, is not in the same. I wouldn't necessarily compare those filmmakers, but yeah, it's quite encouraging that the jury at Venice were able to assess this film for all the larger world issues that it's presenting, but also the fact that it goes in guns blazing.
No, absolutely. I think with New Order and Nomadland, these are two films that speak to the current moment. Both in Mexico, for New Order in Mexico specifically, but there's broader um, thematic resonance. For Nomadland, it's hitting the chord of what's happening in the U.S. right now with social and class divide. And we should mention, we haven't mentioned it yet, but we're talking about these two films, and Nomadland took the Golden Lion and New Order took the Silver. So these are two huge wins for two filmmakers who hopefully who both have a lot to say, and will be cool to watch what they do next.
Mm-hmm.
Shifting gears a little bit is one film I know you were curious about prior to the fest, and that's The Disciple. And the reviews so far seem to be pretty good. That's a film that I am looking forward to. I maybe didn't have it on my radar so much, but now that I've seen some of the reviews come in and some of the buzz, it looks like it's one that could be a bit of a sleeper out of the festival.
Yeah, I did happen to like cherry pick some of the critical reaction. Twitter obviously is really helpful when you're not physically at a film festival and you sort of just want to see, get a gist of what the offerings are. And you have some like pretty strong defenders for this film. And what's quite encouraging is, India it's a huge film industry. They put out a gajillion films out there, but I'm curious about indie film from this country, and I think this is a great example of a new voice that'll sort of do a lot for bridging that gap between what you'd find at art house theaters in New York City and at major film fests. So this film, I believe, picked up the screenplay award, and I believe might be playing at the New York Film Fest if I'm
Yeah,
not
you're right.
mistaken.
Yeah, on both counts.
So,
Yeah.
so that's a nice trifecta of film festivals to back this project. But yeah, only two films in, and this filmmaker is already making a name for himself. Um, Sticking to sophomore films. So one film that, it won the Queer Lion, but she went home empty-handed, if you will, as Mona Fastbold's film, which got great critical buzz. But yeah, I'm not too certain about how the awardage worked out, and why this was left off the list, but it perhaps has a little bit to do with Pieces of a Woman. And I think we both had a sense that this would be a major role for Kirby, but to the extent of winning Best Actress, I don't think neither of us were knew which of the two horses would pan out for her. So I guess that was a surprise for me to see it left off the list, especially after I think it was ranked in the top 5 or 6 films, critically speaking.
Yeah, I mean it's always tough when you have one actress giving two great performances in two films. I mean, one of them is gonna come in second. And I think possibly working, there's a little bit of I don't want to use the word backlash, but there's certainly a conversation right now about having, 3 queer films all set in the past this year alone, with Pieces of a Woman, Ammonite, which we'll talk about shortly, and The World to Come. So there's a bit of that as well. Like maybe there's just a bit of, it's maybe overly familiar in a broad way.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll see. Well, I mean, festivals are always a place where, a lot of films are competing for attention, but it'll be interesting to see in the long run how The World to Come ends up making an impact
Mm-hmm.
on audiences. Um,
And still, yeah, I believe Sony's distributing this in several territories, but I don't know how it's going to work out domestically in the US. For me, another big surprise was the Best Director award went to Wife of a Spy. Again, another film that played at the tail end of the festival. And it certainly is a great sort of like mid-career pick-me-up for Kurosawa, who's usually doing genre films like
Cure.
yeah, exactly. He's
Yeah.
a genre filmmaker, but here he dabbles into something that has historical impact value, it's lush production design and whatnot. So that's quite encouraging. And so I actually have a question for you: Is One Night in Miami was a last minute addition to Venice after having been identified as a selection at TIFF. This would end up playing in the out of comp section um, for Venice.
Mhm.
And now it's sort of like picked up some steam and got some fairly good critical buzz. Do you think Venice kind of screwed up with not including it?
I don't know if I would call it a screw up. I mean, all the films we were just talking about, World to Come, New Order, Nomadland, Pieces of a Woman. I mean, it is, you know, I think we knew that Venice had a pretty stacked lineup, even in a pandemic, but it is a really incredible lineup. So I don't think they missed the boat. Uh, I don't think if this film was in or not in the lineup, we would be regretting it necessarily.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's one more feather in their cap, perhaps, to have the film. I would say the notices, I've seen a mixed bag. I've seen a lot of praise, but also a bit more reserved take. But the bottom line is, I think Amazon picked it up.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one that I guess that yeah, that I think will end up having a big release, and a lot of conversation around it. I think the other question is, whether On the Rocks should have gone there or not. We both know it'll be premiering soon at the New York Film Festival, but shortly before its debut on streaming.
Yeah, I mean, I think for Regina King, I think it's a, I think I think the fact that it's a directorial debut sort of like would have placed perhaps an unfair extra added weight if it were in a comp. So there's that as well. And
Mm.
for Sofia Coppola, perhaps what I was expecting and what I saw out of the trailer. I think that sort of like it would have been too light for the festival, at least in the competition. So yeah, perhaps Apple's move to not showcase it there will make more sense to um, future audiences. It's coming out in October, I believe. So
Yeah.
um, so let's put a bow on Venice and hit TIFF. It was the first weekend. So a lot of great news. So actually, before going on to TIFF, we could say that one of the better things to come out of Venice was the fact that they were actually able to hold a physical edition. The gamble paid off. There was no outbreaks or not. We haven't heard anything yet, but that could say a lot about what we might expect for next year, and especially Cannes 2021. And so, yeah, so hitting Toronto, they're actually having a successful digital edition. They're having honking horn premieres at drive-throughs, a little bit at the Bell Lightbox, but the mix of staying at home and watching at home and being safe, it appears that it's working out. So that's actually another piece of good news, that you can actually hold an event that's shape shifting and a mixture of a whole bunch of different ways to show these films.
Absolutely. It's Venice is showing. Yeah, I think Thierry Frémaux is probably looking at how Venice worked and just applauding. He's probably thrilled that he now has a template for how to run Cannes next year. There's a lot of safety protocols in Venice, but the screenings happened, the conferences, all the stuff happened that we expect. The premieres felt like premieres, so you're right. It sets a standard for other festivals to follow, really. And yeah, Cannes is off to the races. We were talking before we got on this call that at least online, it feels like a regular festival, like just the chatter, the conversations, even TIFF's filmmaker talks and stuff. It feels like an event, which is a hard feat to pull off right now. So good for them. And let's just dive into the films. I think one of the big title that everyone was zeroing in on for TIFF was Ammonite, and the reaction is maybe not what everyone was expecting or hoping for.
Yeah, a lot of comparisons are being made to Portrait of a Lady on Fire, and perhaps that's unfair, or perhaps it's just circumstantial that both films are sort of like set in the same physical relationship
time period-ish.
Yeah, exactly, and they're set off into their own little existence. But yeah, it looks as if it's no longer a front runner for what we thought might be the case. Of course, we're like still 8 months away from anything materializing, but what we can say is that the performances are legit, and that we'll probably be talking about certain aspects of the film as that being A grade. But yeah, it looks as if it's been removed from that conversation, and
it's certainly not the slam dunk home run I think that everyone was expecting. And Kate Winslet now has some strong competition, and but I mean we're talking about a three-way race at the moment, really, for Best Actress between Kate Winslet, who despite notices for the film is getting good reviews, Frances McDormand, who apparently is amazing in Nomadland, and Vanessa Kirby, who is doing career best work in Pieces of a Woman. So it'll be interesting that it's no longer just one. It's no longer a one film conversation.
Mm-hmm.
But speaking of Oscars, I think one of the things to come out of Toronto will be that Apple TV, of all studios, is now an Oscar contender with Wolfwalkers, which is getting ecstatic, glowing reviews this first weekend at Toronto.
Yeah, the filmmaker Tom Moore, who did Secret of Kales, paired up with Ross Stewart. As we know, animated films are usually 3, 4, 5-year endeavor, never certain as to when a release date might come about. And this one sort of like, again, it was a last minute add-on from TIFF, who did a showcase on African films, but also had these more family-oriented films. And like you said, the trades, Variety, I read the playlist. They're backing this film, saying it might be the best animated piece of work this year. And that's, yeah, it is surprising. I sort of like, I was following the Wolfwalkers from a distance, but like I said, there's a lot of these filmmakers that are in the animated mindset, and you just don't know what they're going to come out with and when they're going to come out with. So yeah, that's a fairly interesting thing that occurred there. We'll slowly go into like the festival pickups shortly, but another encouraging piece of news for a title that premiered at Venice and also showcased at TIFF was Philippe Laconte's Night of the Kings. And so that just confirms Neon's commitment to adding titles to their repertoire with subtitles, and are not afraid to go into world cinema. And so they picked up the rights to that project, and I believe there's a couple more screenings during TIFF, so people will have a chance to see that. But besides that, any other major takeaways from this first weekend at TIFF?
No, I mean, it's a good point about Neon. I mean, the film is Ivory Coast's official Oscar submission this year. So, and Neon has already proven they know what to do with foreign films, with Parasite and Portrait of a Lady on Fire. So, wait, that was them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good. And yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how they roll this one out. Other takeaways. Well, it appears that Shift 72 is just going to be the platform of choice for everybody. I mean, by all accounts, it is easy to use, secure. I haven't seen one complaint about anything about using it at all, which is really good, because we both have encountered platforms that are just aggravating to use. We have to log in 15 times before it'll play, and then it doesn't play. So that's very encouraging for sure. Yeah, I mean, other than that, I'm just happy that it's just kind of nice to have the festival happening. That gives us something to discuss, because I mean, back in May, it looked pretty grim after Cannes was canceled. We didn't even know if we would be able to talk about this. So that's pretty cool.
You're absolutely right, and it bodes well for a festival like Sundance that are trying. They're going to try to do those satellite positioning, and satellite cities, and also use this as their platform as well. I think, and I got a good kick out of a lot of the jokes that were being made about the Scotiabank stare case not working.
Yeah.
But for them having like just an awesome time at sitting at home watching films and reviewing films under these great conditions. So hey, like I said, we're only a couple of days in, but kudos to TIFF and to the platform for making sense out of all of this. So we were talking about acquisitions before, and Netflix is just like, they're in spending spree mode. So they picked up Pieces of a Woman, which assures that they're gonna probably place this film in awards consideration conversation. I think the end date is the third week of February, so that assures a showing of that to future odds. Hale Berry's film Bruise picked up a gajillion dollars they picked up the rights for that film, and the curiosity piece for me is actually today they announced that they picked up a COVID filmed project by Sam Levinson that we had a brief details about midway during the summer, and they landed the rights to a shot in black and white film, shot on 35 during COVID, for $30 million. So what's your first reaction at seeing this news?
Well, I'm actually amazed. Well, there's a few reactions. One is I'm amazed at the kind of money Netflix is throwing around. I think they spent $30 million on this COVID shot project, which is bananas. Like, I think that's insane. But you know, I must have really had a bidding war behind it for spending that kind of money. But yeah, I mean, that film, you know, I think so. I've been watching quite a few. I watched Netflix's homemade series of of short films shot during the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And to be honest, despite the caliber of talent that was involved, they weren't all that great. So my big curiosity about this film is if it can say something or meaningful about our lives during this moment without feeling like a novelty, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
or just like curiosity. So the fact that Netflix has spent this kind of money, the fact that it's drawing comparisons, I think, to Marriage Story in terms of its story
Mm-hmm.
about a couple, I guess, going through a relationship problems. I'm keeping I'm curious about it for sure.
So John David Washington and Zendaya, essentially, they hunkered down for like 3 weeks, shot this thing, and this musician slash actress is really in an interesting point career wise. I mean, we just saw the Dune trailer, and she's going to be in Brian Hegeland's Finest Kind. That's for the future. So she's in a really interesting moment. Of course, Washington, we saw his face for the last 6 months just with all the Tenant buzz. So there's certain there's a chemistry there that might have brought up that bidding war, or might have brought up that bid
Mm.
to what we think is an inflated price for a black and white film. They did pick up a film at Sundance called 40-Year-Old Version, so they're not they're they're not averse to taking on black and white films, but this is cut from a different cloth,
Mm.
and so the filmmaker is Sam Levinson, and actually just wrote the screenplay for Adrian Lynn's Deep Water, which might or might not come out. That's a studio film, and so he did Assassination Nation. That was his second feature. It was at Sundance several years back. I'm forgetting the title, but it was a very Sundance-y film. And here he paired up with cinematographer Marcel Rev, who's a Hungarian cinematographer who worked with Munduzero. And yeah, so there's a whole bunch of different interesting elements here in terms of this collaboration. And yeah, it was a shock to see that this film was picked up for this price tag.
Yeah, and we can't fail to mention that Sam Levinson is he's a writer on Euphoria, which is Zendaya's big kind of breakout as well, the HBO series. So that collaboration started there, and it looks like it's fruitful. It looks like they're taking it to the next level, or really making it stronger. So it'll be interesting. There's a lot of elements here that are on the cusp of just huge breakout. So
Yeah, I get a feeling that's going to be a truly intimate film. Um, Speaking about Netflix, is that they sort of like built this project called I'm forgetting the title here, The Harder They Fall.
mm-hmm.
And so this week it was reported that they got Regina King, we just spoke about, Zazie Beetz, and Keith Stanfield. I'm screwing up the name here. Who joined Idris Elba and Jonathan Majors, who was featured in The Last Black Man in San Francisco, one of my favorite films of Sundance 2 years back. So what we're seeing here is a black Western. And so, yeah, I wanted to talk about what this project might look like, what it might sound like. So are you familiar with the filmmaker?
I am not familiar with the filmmaker. This will be his feature debut, which for me is the most intriguing element. I know he has backing from Jay-Z, who I think he worked with before, and the filmmaker is also a musician. So to get this kind of cast and Netflix support for your first film is pretty remarkable. And we don't see a lot of westerns. They're not movies that are immediately funded because they tend to be a little expensive. We certainly don't see any all black westerns either, at all. So on that basis, it's exciting. My only perhaps hesitation is that the screenplay is by Boaz Yakin. He's the co-writer on it. I mean, his CV is not. I mean, we're talking like Prince of Persia, Now You See Me. I think his biggest claim to indie fame is probably Fresh,
Mm-hmm.
but that was 1994. That was
Yeah.
like 25 years ago. So, listen, I think the cast is awesome. I think there's a huge amount of potential here, but for me, I want that script to be amazing.
Yeah, I totally hear you. And I think what might be an interesting facet to this film, it's a revenge film. And essentially, Majors portrays an outlaw named Nat Love, who discovers that his enemy, played by Idris Elba, is released from prison. And so that he reunites his gang and sort of like, tracks this guy. Um, what I was thinking of when I saw the Jay-Z name, the fact that this filmmaker is the brother of Seal, that the musical element to this film is going to play a huge importance. And I don't dare mention Ennio Morricone, but perhaps we're going to get some, I don't know, some hip hop version
Mm.
of what a Western sounds like. So I hear what you're saying about that point, but this is also a point of
Yeah,
consideration
no,
that.
I hear what you're saying, and like you're right. This is a big opportunity to take the Western like tropes and make them new again, make them different, bring a different voice. And you're right, that potential is definitely there. And the premise you just described is like also like classic Western story. So if
Hmm.
they can like twist it, cool, cool. I'm into it.
Lawrence Bender, I believe, is one of the
He
producers.
is, yeah, he's one of the producers on it.
So yeah, it's definitely Tarantino wheelhouse. We might be thinking of him when we watch this film. Heading on to our next casting mention is a filmmaker that I quite I discovered him with his second film, and this is his third film. Andrea, I'm going to screw up his name. Pallaoro, I believe is how you pronounce his name, who did this fantastic film called Hannah with Charlotte Rampling that won, I believe, at in Venice, would be showcased at TIFF. That's where I discovered it. And for me, it was just like, I don't use the word masterwork lightly, but yeah, his film Hannah was just blew me away. So he's been trying to put together this third project called Monica. No names had been attached to the project in the past, but so they named Trace, Lysette, Patricia Clarkson, Anna Paquin, and Adriana Barraza, who we know from Babel. And it's what I find interesting is that we're using an actor in a role that's very much that they can very much identify with. Um, and essentially, Monica tells a story of somebody that's returning to the Midwest to take care of family, a dying mother in this case, and sort of like we're going to explore that world of how that family might have been fractured and sort of like what to expect when everything comes together in a really compassionate setting. So yeah, what are your immediate thoughts about this project?
Well, there's two things. We should point out that it's actually the story of a transgender woman who travels back to the Midwest to take care of her dying mother. So that's a really important element.
Yeah.
And honestly, you draft what we're going to talk about each week, and I take a look. And I looked at this, and I was like, I don't know, like I don't know the filmmaker, but hearing you talk about Hannah has now made me that much more interested in this project. I had no idea. So yeah, I mean, I'm always excited when a foreign filmmaker can use their festival success to sort of take the next step and come to Hollywood in a way, use Hollywood actors, but still retain their voice. And that's what this really seems like to me. Like a filmmaker who's made their mark on Toronto and Venice, and is now do something still in their voice, but maybe with a bit more money and a bit more clout behind it.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I want to mention. Is that he cast the role. You know, a lot of there's sort of like a backlash right now. People being cast for roles that shouldn't necessarily be assigned to them. And here he's sort of like going a little bit like what Sebastian Lelio did with Gloria, and sort of like finding the perfect person to go into the discord or to go into the mindset of the character. And I think it sort of like traces a little bit what this actress might have felt like or dealt with in her own past. So I think there's some added value to that. And going back to Hannah, Charlotte Rampling, it's almost like I would say the second part of Hannah is all, there's very little dialogue in that it all the struggle she's going with is internally processed and just fills up the screen with so much angst and sorrow and really putting the weight of the world on one person's shoulders. And so I'm curious how sort of like that DNA will translate here, seeing that it might be a more of an ensemble project. But yeah, definitely worth checking out his second film. And his first film was also at the Venice Film Festival. So I myself have to go and revisit his first offering. Moving along, a project that's shooting this fall. Olivia Wilde has been tied to a lot of projects since breaking out with Booksmart, Booksmart, and it appears that Don't Worry, Darling, it really is her next project. They've gone through casting notices now, and now they're doing a casting replacement. So, yeah, let's look at the new addition to the project and what it says about what the project might feel like or look like. So she added Harry Styles.
Yep. Now, so Harry Styles is replacing Shia LaBeouf, who is actually also getting good reviews right now for Pieces of a Woman. So my first takeaway is it's a very different energy to bring to a movie with pop star Harry Styles replacing, sort of complicated Shia LaBeouf. So that's my first takeaway. But I think the interesting thing for me about this project is the script itself was subject to a huge bidding war. It was one of the biggest spec scripts in Hollywood last year. So for me, my interest in the film is Olivia Wilde's pivoting from a comedy with Booksmart to what's described as a psychological thriller set in the 1950s and centering around a housewife. So that's a very different kind of film to make, but one that'll be interesting to see come together for sure.
Yeah, I believe the idea is that Harry Styles' character is the better half of the protagonist, which is I believe Florence Pugh's. She's the protagonist of this film. So definitely, I think when I think of the 50s, I think of tough, rugged men. Here, I'm thinking of Styles reminds me a little bit of Timothy Chalamet, a little bit, just like his physicality. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what that package looks like and how that symmetry exists between those two characters.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a good point. I could see Styles being like sort of a Mad Men-y 1950s kind of guy quite easily. And yeah, I mean, they're planning to shoot this fall. So I mean, as we're talking about all these films that are gearing up, it is kind of nice to that in the midst of all this chaos, we have these films that are still really working hard to get shooting. So that's pretty cool. So hopefully, by this time next year, we'll be talking about its TIFF premiere.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the pieces are still falling into place, and so like this is a project that I think we have one or two lines to go on. So we actually don't know what Harry Styles' character is going to be, but we can, we can take a guess or gather. We'll conclude with another project that's going to be lensing this year, end of this year. A filmmaker that pretty much belongs to like a West Coast that's not really well represented. So Aaron Katz, who's been in the indie film game since Dance Party USA in 2006. He's getting involved in a project called Blood Ties. So this week, we have 3 central actors to the story that were cast. So yeah, let's go into where Aaron Katz is in his career and sort of like what this project smells like or looks like or feels like to you.
So, I mean, career-wise, Aaron Katz, it's been interesting because a lot of his, I guess you would say, contemporaries, I would say like Alex Ross Perry or Joe Swanberg, Amy Seimetz, they've all kind of moved into the next levels of their career with more mainstream kind of projects or at least more exposure. And I feel like he's still been at a certain level of indie world sort of fame or
Yeah, kind of like
status.
the Zellner brothers in a way.
Yeah, that's a really good comparison as well. So it feels like this project, which has a lot of New Yorker article, it's a detective story. I feel like this is going to be his project that sort of gets him into the next level of filmmaking. That I feel like he's been sort of. I think Gemini was sort of that film that almost got him there, and this might push him over.
Yeah, so this project stars, so it's potentially from a detective's point of view. And so I'm going to screw up her name. It's Gugu Mbatha-Raw with Kiernan Shipka from Mad Men and Cole Sprouse, who essentially play a couple on the run. Now, this is based on a true story. It's been covered by, the 2020s of this world. And essentially, what we come to discover is that that potentially this couple, not both people are not. How can I say this? They're
How
both
does they seem?
exactly, and they're not both guilty parties.
Mm.
And so I won't spoil any elements here, but essentially it's 2 people that are on the run, and apparently the real life figures escaped to Europe for almost half a decade, and so this is about tracing those steps. First thing that came to mind was Natural Born Killers, but after that it got replaced by Andrew Jarecki's All Good Things. So sort of like how being part of a wealthy family might can take its toll and essentially push people to go off the deep end. And so so yeah, if there's any thriller elements to this, great. But I think the story about the human condition and how we deal with sort of like our parents, um, and like having the like a true discord between uh, the adult child and people of a different generation. I think it's gonna I think we might be seeing facets of that in this film.
Yeah, well, it really sounds like the darker secrets that are behind like the facade of the middle class or suburban life or whatever. So And that's all really good territory for Aaron Katz, who was putting together easily his most starry project to date, for sure.
Yeah, and Blood Ties, it's a play on words. It's obviously it's about that linkage and between family members, but it's also about DNA and how we incriminate people, and so yeah, the crime scene was especially bloody. So on that good news, that concludes our episode of IndieSponge. Thank you very much, Kevin.
Always a pleasure.
And we'll be touching base next week and looking at the final results for TIFF. I'm Eric Lavallée. I'm editor-in-chief and site owner for IONCINEMA.com. And this is
Kevin Jagernauth, contributing writer for the playlist.
And together we are IndieSponge.